The Galactic Empire mocked Earth until the human war engines activated. The stars had always watched Earth with cold indifference. But on that autumn morning, something watched back. High Commander Celtrix stood on the bridge of his cruiser, the Voldorian warship Eternal Dominion, and looked down at the blue planet beneath him with disgust and amusement mixed together in his reptilian eyes. "This is what the scouts found?" he asked his second officer, his voice dripping with contempt. "This tiny world with its primitive creatures?" The second officer, a younger Veldorian named Keth, nodded quickly and pulled up the scanner data on the holographic display. "Yes, High Commander," Keth replied nervously. "They call themselves humans, and they have only recently developed nuclear technology and basic space travel. And their fastest ships can barely reach their neighboring planets," Celtrix laughed. And it was a harsh and cruel sound that echoed through the bridge. The Voldorian Galactic Empire had ruled the Orion arm of the galaxy for 12,000 years. And in all that time, they had conquered over 300 species across countless worlds. And not once had they faced a serious challenge to their power. They had perfected the art of subjugation. And every species fell into one of three categories: slaves for labor, soldiers for war, or extinct for resistance. Strix already knew which category humanity would occupy. "Begin the broadcast," he commanded, and his crew rushed to obey within minutes. Every television screen, every radio, every phone, and every computer on Earth displayed the same image: the terrifying face of High Commander Celtrix, 7 feet tall with scales like polished obsidian and eyes that burned with ancient cruelty. "Inhabitants of the planet you call Earth," Celtrix announced in a voice that had been translated into every human language. "I am High Commander Celtrix of Voldorian Galactic Empire, and I bring you the integration decree. Across the world, billions of humans stopped what they were doing and watched in shock and fear and confusion. You have 30 of your solar cycles to surrender all sovereignty to the Empire." Celtrix continued with a smile that showed rows of sharp teeth. "You will dismantle your primitive military forces, and you will accept your role as a labor species within our hierarchy. And any resistance will result in the complete annihilation of your kind." The broadcast ended, and chaos erupted across Earth. Governments convened emergency sessions, and militaries went to high alert. And ordinary people looked up at the sky with terror in their hearts. 3 days later, the United Nations sent a delegation to meet with the Valdorians aboard the Eternal Dominion. The Pones, human representatives, were led by Secretary General Amara Okonkwo, a woman from Nigeria who had spent her entire life fighting for peace and justice. And beside her walked General Marcus Stone from the United States, Admiral Chun Wei from China, and Dr. Elena Vasquez from Argentina. They were escorted into a massive chamber where Celtrix waited with dozens of Valdorian officers and, more importantly, hundreds of floating cameras that broadcast the meeting live to every corner of the galaxy. This was standard Valdorian practice. Humiliate the conquered species publicly so that all others would learn the cost of defiance. "Welcome, humans," Celtrix said mockingly as he gestured at the small delegation. "Please, share your concerns with the Empire, and I promise we will listen with great interest." The Valdorian officers laughed, and across 1,000 worlds, billions of alien viewers laughed along with them. Secretary General Okonkwo stepped forward with dignity and spoke clearly. "We ask for more time," she said calmly. 30 days is not enough for our people to prepare for such a massive change. And we request at least 1 year to educate our population and transition peacefully." Celtrix leaned forward with amusement dancing in his eyes. "More time?" he repeated mockingly. "And what would you do with more time, little human?" "We would ensure a smooth integration," Okonkwo replied steadily, "and minimize suffering for our people. Suffering is irrelevant. Celtrix snapped, his amusement turning to irritation. Your people exist to serve the Empire, and nothing more. And we do not negotiate with species who have nothing to offer. General Marcus Stone, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward with his weathered face showing no emotion. Nothing to offer? Stone asked quietly. You seem very certain of that. Celtrix turned his attention to the old soldier and sneered openly. What could you possibly threaten us with? Celtrix demanded as he gestured at the view screen showing his cruiser hovering above Earth. You have no fleet, and you have no shields. And you do not even have faster-than-light capability. And my single cruiser carries enough firepower to turn your largest cities to glass. Stone said nothing. And his silence seemed to amuse Celtrix even more. Look at this creature, Celtrix announced to the cameras. This is what passes for a warrior on their world. An old man in a fancy uniform who cannot even speak when faced with his betters. The Voldorian officers roared with laughter. And across the galaxy, the broadcast became the most watched entertainment program in a century. But then Stone did something unexpected. He smiled. It was not a nervous smile or a defeated smile, but the smile of a man who held a secret that would change everything. You have made your terms clear, Stone said slowly. And now I will make ours. Celtrix blinked in surprise, and his laughter died in his throat. Your terms? He asked with disbelief coloring his voice. You dare to speak of terms? Stone reached into his pocket and pulled out a small communication device. And he pressed a single button while looking directly into the cameras. Prometheus Protocol authorized. He said simply. For a moment, nothing happened. And Celtrix opened his mouth to mock the humans again. But then alarms began blaring across the Eternal Dominion. Kath rushed to his console with panic in his eyes and shouted, Aye, Commander. We are detecting massive energy signatures on the planet's surface. And they are unlike anything in our database. Celtrix pushed him aside and stared at the readings with his reptilian face slowly shifting from confusion to concern. That cannot be correct, he muttered as the numbers climbed higher and higher. Those power levels would require technology that these primitives could not possibly possess. Down on Earth, in secret facilities buried beneath mountains and oceans on 6 continents. Lights that had been dark for decades suddenly flickered to life in Antarctica. Diara Elena Vasquez watched the activation sequence begin and felt tears streaming down her face. 80 years, she whispered to the technicians around her. 80 years of preparation, and now the moment has finally arrived. General Stone looked at Celtrix one final time before the human delegation was escorted out. You asked what we could threaten you with, Stone said as he walked toward the exit. And now you will find out, and I promise you will not enjoy the answer. The galaxy had laughed at humanity for the last time. The Galactic Empire mocked Earth until the human war engines activated. The year was 1947. And the New Mexico desert was quiet beneath a sky full of stars. William Brazel was a simple rancher who had lived his entire life in the shadow of those endless skies. And he had never imagined that anything from beyond them would ever touch his world. But on that hot July night, something fell from the heavens and crashed into his land with a sound like thunder. When he reached the crash site the next morning, he found something that would change human history forever. It was not a weather balloon as the government would later claim. And it was not a secret military aircraft as some would speculate for decades to come. It was a ship from another world. And inside that ship, William Brazel found 2 things. A dying creature with skin like silver moonlight and a message carved into a metal tablet that glowed with strange symbols. The military arrived within hours and took everything away, including William Brazel himself for questioning that would last 3 weeks. But the secret could not be contained. Forever President Harry Truman was briefed within days. And what he learned kept him awake for many nights afterward. The creature was called an architect. and its species had once ruled a peaceful alliance of worlds on the far side of the galaxy. But 12,000 years ago, the Voldorian Empire had come for them. The architects were brilliant scientists and artists and dreamers, but they were not warriors. And the Valdorians had crushed them without mercy and burned their worlds and scattered their people to the cosmic winds. This dying architect had traveled for centuries across the vast darkness between stars, carrying a warning for any species that might listen. Message on the tablet was simple and terrifying. They will come for you, and you must be ready. And here is everything we know. Along with the warning came blueprints and schematics and technical specifications for weapons and shields and power sources that human scientists could barely comprehend. President Truman understood immediately what this meant, and he gathered the leaders of every major nation for a secret meeting that history would never record. We are enemies, he told them bluntly, and we have fought wars against each other, and we will probably fight wars again in the future, but none of that matters if we are all dead. The Soviet Union and China and Great Britain and France and every other nation represented in that room agreed to something unprecedented. Cooperation on a scale never before attempted in human history. They called it the Prometheus Initiative for 80 years. While the world above ground continued with its cold wars and conflicts and political dramas, the greatest minds of every generation worked together in secret facilities beneath the earth. They built 12 massive structures called war engines, each one 5 kilometers long and armed with weapons based on architect technology. Dr. Elena Vasquez had joined the project at age 22, a brilliant physicist from Buenos Aires who had been recruited after publishing a paper on theoretical energy manipulation. Now, she was 64 years old and standing in the Antarctic Command Center, watching the activation sequence that she had spent her entire adult life preparing for. All 12 war engines are responding, announced Technical Director James Morrison, a young man from Canada who had inherited the position from his father. Power cores are stable and weapon systems are coming online. Elena nodded and felt the weight of 8 decades pressing down upon her shoulders. She thought about all the scientists who had worked on this project and never lived to see this day. And she thought about the sacrifices made by countless families who had kept the secret for generations. Show me the global view, she commanded. The main screen flickered and displayed a map of Earth with 12 glowing points scattered across the continents. Beneath the Rocky Mountains in North America sat the war engine called Atlas, designed primarily for defensive operations with shield technology that could protect entire regions. Beneath the Himalayas in Asia rested Titan, the most heavily armed of all the war engines, with offensive capabilities that made nuclear weapons look like firecrackers. Dr. lay beneath the Pacific Ocean near China, and Phoenix waited beneath the Sahara Desert in Africa, and Thunder slept beneath the Ural Mountains in Russia. Each war engine had been named and built and staffed by the nations above it, but they all served a single purpose: the defense of humanity against extinction. General Marcus Stone arrived in the command center via high-speed underground transport. Just as the final activation protocols completed, he'd been returned to Earth by the Voldorians, who had dismissed the humans as too insignificant to hold as hostages. And that dismissal was the greatest mistake Celtrix had ever made. Status report, Stone demanded as he took his position at the command console. All war engines are fully operational. Elena replied with pride in her voice, despite her exhaustion. Shield networks are establishing planetary coverage as we speak, and weapon systems are charged and ready. Stone nodded grimly and looked at the faces of the men and women around him. These were the inheritors of the Prometheus Initiative, the children and grandchildren of the original scientists and soldiers who had started this project before most of them were born. 80 years Stone said quietly. My grandfather was in that first meeting with Truman, and my father commanded this facility before me. And now it falls to our generation to finish what they started. A young officer named Sarah Chun approached with urgent news on her tablet. Sir, the Voldorian cruiser is powering up its weapons, she reported with fear barely hidden in her voice. They are targeting major population centers across North America. Stone did not hesitate even for a moment. Raise the shields, he ordered calmly, and prepare Titan for counterattack across the world. Billions of humans looked up at the sky and saw something miraculous happening. Mountains were splitting open as massive structures rose from beneath the earth, and oceans were boiling as war engines emerged from hidden underwater facilities. And the ground itself was shaking as humanity's secret weapons finally revealed themselves to the cosmos high above in his cruiser. I, Commander Celtrix, watched his sensors and felt something he had never experienced in 300 years of conquest. He felt afraid. What is this? He whispered as 12 signatures appeared on his screen, each one larger than his flagship and growing stronger by the second. How is this possible? But there was no one who could answer him, because the architects who had given humanity this gift were long dead, and the humans who had built these weapons were not interested in explaining anything. The time for talking was over, and the time for action had begun. Elena Vasquez looked at Marcus Stone, and Stone looked at the main screen where Celtrix's cruiser was preparing to rain fire down upon innocent humans. They wanted to see what we could threaten them with, Stone said with cold determination in his eyes. He turned to the weapons officer and gave an order that would echo through galactic history. Show them. The Galactic Empire mocked Earth until the human war engines activated. High Commander Celtrix had conquered 47 worlds in his 300 years of service to the Valdorian Empire, and he had never once known the taste of defeat that was about to change. Fire all weapons, he screamed at his crew as panic began to creep into his voice. Destroy those structures before they can fully activate. The Eternal Dominion unleashed its fury upon the earth below, and plasma bolts the size of buildings rained down from orbit toward the cities of North America. New York and Los Angeles and Chicago and Houston would have been turned to ash in seconds, but the fire never reached them. A shimmering barrier of golden light appeared across the entire continent, and every single plasma bolt stopped in midair as if it had struck an invisible wall. The war engine Atlas had raised its shields. Impossible, Celtrix roared as he slammed his fist against his console. That is architect shielding technology, and the architects were destroyed thousands of years ago. Second Officer Keth was staring at his instruments with his face frozen in terror. High Commander, the shields are not just blocking our weapons, he reported with a trembling voice. They are absorbing the energy and converting it into additional power, and every shot we fire makes them stronger. Celtrix could not believe what he was hearing, because this violated everything he knew about warfare and conquest. The Valdorians had developed their plasma weapons specifically because no known shield technology could withstand sustained bombardment. And yet, these humans had somehow created defenses that fed on his attacks. Continue firing, Celtrix commanded desperately. No shield can hold forever. But even as the words left his mouth, he saw something on the view screen that made his blood run cold across the Himalayan mountains of Asia. The ground was splitting apart as a massive structure rose from beneath the peaks. It was the war engine called Titan, and it was the largest weapon humanity had ever built. High Commander, Keth screamed. Energy spike detected from the emerging structure, and the power readings are beyond anything in our records. Deep beneath the mountains, Weapons Officer Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka sat at her console with her finger hovering over the firing control. She was 28 years old, and she had trained for this moment since she was 16, and her grandmother had helped design the very weapon she was about to use. General Stone's voice came through the communication system. calm and steady despite the chaos erupting around the world. "Titan, you are authorized to engage the enemy vessel," he said. Simply Yuki looked at her commanding officer, Admiral Sato, who nodded once with grim determination. "Firing Sunder Lance," Yuki announced. And she pressed the button that would change galactic history. Sunder Lance was a weapon that the architects had created in their final desperate days. A beam of concentrated energy that did not simply burn or explode, but rather tore apart the very bonds that held matter together. It had never been used in combat because the architects had finished building it too late to save themselves. But humanity had no such hesitation. A beam of pure white light erupted from Titan and shot upward through atmosphere toward the Valdorian cruiser Celtrix. Had exactly 2 seconds to see it coming. Evasive maneuvers. He screamed, but his cruiser was not designed for quick movements, and the beam crossed the distance between Earth and orbit in less than a heartbeat. The Sunderland struck the Eternal Dominion directly in its center mass Valdorian shields. The pride of the Empire's military technology flickered once and then died. The beam continued through the ship as if the shields had never existed, and it carved the mighty cruiser in half, with surgical precision. Explosions rippled across both sections of the dying vessel as power systems overloaded and ammunition stores detonated. And the cameras that had been broadcasting to the entire galaxy captured every horrifying moment. High Commander Celtrix, conqueror of 47 worlds and terror of countless species, had just enough time to feel genuine fear before his bridge exploded around him. His final scream echoed across 1,000 Valdorian worlds, and then there was silence in the Antarctic Command Center. General Stone watched the debris of the enemy cruiser begin to fall toward Earth in burning pieces. "Track those fragments," he ordered calmly. "Use blast shields to redirect anything that might hit populated areas." Dr. Elena Vasquez was crying. That whether from relief or exhaustion or simple overwhelming emotion, she could not say, "We did it." She whispered, 80 years of work. "And we actually did it." But Stone shook his head grimly as he pulled up the tactical display. "We destroyed one cruiser," he said seriously. "The Valdorian Empire has thousands more. And when they learn what happened here today, they will send an armada to crush us across the world." Humanity celebrated in the streets. People who had lived there entire lives in fear of nuclear war or climate catastrophe, or 100 other threats, had just witnessed something miraculous. Their planet had defended itself against alien invaders, but the leaders who knew the truth understood that this was only the beginning. Secretary General Okonkwo addressed the world from the United Nations headquarters, which was still standing thanks to the shields that Atlas had raised. "People of Earth," she announced with strength in her voice despite her exhaustion, "we have won our first battle, but the war for our survival has only just begun. And we must now unite as never before in the halls of power across every nation." Emergency meetings were called, and old rivalries were set aside, and resources were pledged to a common cause. The Prometheus Initiative had been a secret project involving only a select few, but now that the secret was out, all of humanity would join. The effort. Factories that had built cars began building ships, and laboratories that had studied diseases began studying alien technology, and soldiers who had trained to fight each other began training to fight together. The Valdorian Empire had ruled the stars for 12,000 years through fear and cruelty. They were about to learn that humans did not surrender to fear in a moon orbiting a gas giant. In the Valdorian home system, Empress Valeth received the news of Celtrix's death with cold fury burning in her ancient eyes. "Mobilize the Third Armada," she commanded her advisors. "These humans have insulted the Empire, and they will pay for it with their extinction." 600 warships began preparing for the journey to Earth and humanity. for the first time in its existence, began preparing to fight a war among the stars. The Galactic Empire mocked Earth until the human war engines activated. 3 weeks had passed since the destruction of High Commander Celtrix, and humanity had not wasted a single moment in shipyards hastily constructed across the globe. Workers labored around the clock to build vessels that combined human engineering with architect technology, and these ships were ugly and angular and looked nothing like the sleek Valdorian cruisers. But they were fast and deadly, and crewed by men and women who would rather die than surrender. Admiral Chen Wei stood on the bridge of the war engine Dragon as it rose from the Pacific Ocean and climbed toward orbit. He was 63 years old and had spent most of his life preparing for conventional warfare, but nothing in his training had prepared him for this status of the fleet. He commanded his tactical officer, a young woman named Lieutenant Park, pulled up the display. 78 human vessels have completed construction and are combat ready, she reported with pride in her voice. Another 42 will be finished within the week. Chun nodded and looked at the ships gathering around his war engine. They were crewed by volunteers from every nation on Earth. People who had stepped forward, knowing they might never return home. And painted on each hull was a message in dozens of human languages. "Come and take it." It was a phrase from ancient human history, spoken by warriors facing overwhelming odds, and it seemed fitting for what was about to happen. "Admiral," Lieutenant Park suddenly shouted, multiple hyperspace signatures detected at the edge of the solar system. "And the count is still climbing." Chun felt his heart grow heavy, but his voice remained steady. "How many?" Park's face went pale as the numbers appeared on her screen. 600 warships, she whispered. The entire Third Armada. The Valdorian fleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of angry hornets. And each ship was larger than any human vessel except for the war engines themselves. Admiral Vexator, commander of the Third Armada, stood on his flagship and smiled as he surveyed the human defenses. "Is this all they have?" he asked with contempt dripping from his words. 12 of those large structures, and fewer than 100 primitive ships? His officers laughed at the pitiful sight before them. "Begin the attack," Vexator ordered. "Leave nothing alive." 600 Valdorian warships surged toward Earth with their weapons charging and their crews eager for an easy victory. Admiral Chun Wei watched them come and felt no fear, only cold determination. "All war engines, raise planetary shields," he commanded. "All human vessels, form up behind Dragon and prepare to execute Pattern Omega." The Valdorians expected the humans to cower behind their shields and wait for death. They did not expect what happened next. As the alien fleet approached, the 12 war engines fired their sunder lances in perfect coordination, and 12 beams of white light stabbed outward and destroyed 12 Valdorian ships in the first second of battle. Admiral Vexator stumbled in shock as a quarter of his lead squadron vanished in explosions. "Return fire," he screamed. "Target those platforms." The Valdorian fleet unleashed a storm of plasma bolts that lit up the darkness of space. But Atlas and its sister war engines had linked their shields together, and the attacks were absorbed and converted into energy that made the shields even stronger. And then the human ships attacked. Admiral Chum had studied every record of Valdorian combat tactics that the architects had left behind, and he had developed strategies that no alien commander had ever faced. "Execute Pattern Omega," he commanded. The 78 human ships did not form neat battle lines like civilized species were supposed to do. Instead, they scattered in every direction and dove directly into the Valdorian formation, weaving between the massive alien warships like wolves among elephants. The Valdorians tried to target them, but the human ships were too fast and too erratic, and every shot missed while the humans fired back at point-blank range. Then the humans did something that horrified the entire Valdorian fleet captain, Maria Santos of the destroyer. Defiance found her ship crippled by a lucky Valdorian hit. Her engines destroyed, and her weapons offline. Any civilized species would have surrendered at that point. Instead, Captain Santos aimed her dying ship directly at the nearest Valdorian cruiser. "All hands, abandon ship," she commanded, and then she overloaded her reactor core. The Defiance struck the Valdorian cruiser and detonated with the force of a small star, destroying both vessels in a blinding explosion across the battlefield. Other human captains did the same thing when their ships were damaged beyond repair. They did not surrender, and they did not retreat, and they turned their own deaths into weapons against the enemy. Admiral Vexator watched in horror as his fleet began to fall apart. "What kind of creatures are these?" he demanded of his officers. "They attack without formation. They use nuclear weapons at close range, and they destroy themselves to destroy us." His second officer had no answer because nothing in Valdorian military history had prepared them for enemies who fought like this. The battle raged for 6 hours, and it was the most brutal conflict the galaxy had seen in millennia. Valdorian ships that were boarded by human marines found themselves fighting hand-to-hand in corridors designed for creatures twice the size of humans. The humans used this to their advantage, crawling through maintenance tunnels and attacking from unexpected angles and refusing to die even when outnumbered and outgunned by the time Vexator ordered the retreat. He had lost 400 ships, 400 vessels of the mighty Third Armada, destroyed by a species that had not even known aliens existed 1 month ago. The human fleet had suffered terrible losses as well. 3 war engines had been destroyed: Phoenix in Africa, Thunder in Russia, and Storm in South America. 62 human vessels had been lost, with all hands. Over 40,000 human soldiers and sailors had given their lives to defend their world, but they had. One Admiral Chun Wei looked at the retreating Valdorian fleet and felt tears running down his weathered face. "Track them until they leave the solar system," he ordered quietly, "and then begin recovery operations for our fallen on Earth." People watched the battle through satellites and long-range cameras, and when the Valdorian fleet turned to flee, a cheer erupted across the entire planet. Humanity had faced the greatest military power in the galaxy and had refused to break in the days that followed. Memorials were built for the fallen and new ships were laid down in the shipyards, and the world began to understand that everything had changed. General Marcus Stone stood before the United Nations and spoke words that would echo through history. "We did not ask for this war," he said with grief and pride mixed in his voice, "but we will finish it. And we will never stop fighting until our people are safe and our future is secure." The Valdorian Empire had sent its finest armada to crush humanity, and humanity had sent them running back to the stars. The Galactic Empire mocked Earth until the human war engines activated. 1 year had passed since the Battle of Earth, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Valdorian Empire had ruled through fear for 12,000 years. But fear only works when the victims believe they cannot fight back. Humanity had proven that belief wrong, and the consequences rippled across 1,000 worlds. Empress Valeth sat upon her throne on the Valdorian homeworld and read the latest reports with cold fury in her ancient eyes. Emperor Malachar X was dead, executed by his own admiralty for leading the empire into a catastrophic defeat. Valeth had taken his place, and she was called Valeth the Pragmatic because she understood something her predecessor never had. Winning was more important than pride. "Show me the map," she commanded her advisors. The holographic display flickered to life, and what it showed made the assembled Valdorian nobles gasp in disbelief. The blue symbol of Earth, a circle with white continents, was spreading across the galaxy like a plague in the years since the battle. Humanity had not simply rebuilt their defenses, they had gone on the offensive. Human fleets had liberated 17 species that the Valdorians had enslaved. And those species had eagerly joined the new human alliance because they remembered the architects and they knew the prophecy the dying alien had left behind. The message had spread across the galaxy through whispers and rumors. The humans are the inheritors of the architects, and they have come to free us all, species that had been crushed beneath the Valdorian boot for millennia now flew alongside human ships and wore the blue emblem of Earth on their uniforms. The Valdorian Empire was shrinking for the first time in its entire history. We cannot sustain this war, Valeth admitted to her advisors with bitterness in her voice. Every battle costs us ships we cannot replace. While the humans seem to build new vessels faster than we can destroy them. It was true. And the reason was something the Valdorians had never anticipated. Humanity did not fight like other species. When a Valdorian world was conquered, its people became slaves who worked only because they feared punishment. But when humans liberated a world, the freed species became allies who worked because they believed in the cause. Human factories operated around the clock because their workers wanted victory, not because overseers forced them to labor. And that made all the difference. There is another option, said Ambassador Keth, who had survived the destruction of the Eternal Dominion by being stationed on another ship during the first battle. Valeth turned her cold gaze upon him. Speak, she commanded. We could negotiate. Keth said carefully, knowing that such words could cost him his life. The humans have shown themselves willing to accept surrender from worlds that do not resist. And they treat their allies with respect rather than cruelty. The throne room erupted in outrage as nobles shouted that surrender was unthinkable and honor demanded they fight to the fight to these. Last but Valeth raised her hand, and silence fell immediately. The humans have a saying, she said quietly, that the definition of madness is doing the same thing repeatedly while expecting different results. She looked at the map again, at the blue symbols spreading ever closer to Valdorian core territory. Send a diplomatic vessel to the Sol system, she commanded, under a flag of truce, on the moon called Luna by the humans. A grand chamber had been constructed for exactly this purpose. General Marcus Stone, now Supreme Commander of the United Earth Defense Force, stood at the head of a long table as the Valdorian delegation entered. He was older now, his hair completely gray, and his face lined with the weight of command, but his eyes were still sharp, and his voice was still strong. The Valdorian ambassador, a female named Sareth, approached with her head held high, despite the humiliation of being forced to negotiate with a species that had been called primitive just 1 year ago. The Empire wishes to discuss terms for ending this conflict, she announced. Formally, Stone nodded and gestured for her to sit. We are willing to listen, he said calmly. But I want to be clear about something from the beginning. He pressed a button, and the wall behind him became transparent, revealing a view of the construction happening in orbit above Luna. Massive shipyards stretched across the darkness of space, and within them, new war engines were being built, each one larger and more powerful than the originals. We spent 80 years preparing for you, Stone said with no emotion in his voice, hiding in the shadows and building in secret because we knew we could not win open war. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the evidence of humanity's rapidly growing power. Now we are not hiding anymore, he continued. And imagine what we will build now that we have nothing to conceal. Sareth felt a chill run down her spine as she understood what he was saying. Humanity had matched the Valdorian Empire while fighting with one hand tied behind their back. If this war continued, the humans would eventually become unstoppable. What are your terms? She asked quietly. Stone returned to his seat and spoke without hesitation. The Empire will release all 17 species it has enslaved, he said firmly. and those species will be given full sovereignty over their own worlds. Sareth flinched but nodded. The Empire will provide reparations for the destruction it has caused, Stone continued, and will face justice for the genocide of the architects 12,000 years ago. Justice? Sareth asked nervously. What kind of justice? Stone leaned forward with intensity in his gaze. The architects left us a message, he said quietly. And they did not ask us for revenge, and they did not ask us to destroy the Valdorians. And they only asked us to survive and to remember them. He paused and looked at the ambassador with something that might have been understanding. We will build a memorial on every world where the architects once lived, he said. And the Valdorian Empire will help us build them. And your people will learn what was lost because of their ancestors. Sareth was silent for a long moment. She had expected demands for territory or tribute or the kind of brutal punishment the Valdorians themselves would have imposed on a defeated enemy. Instead, the humans wanted memory and justice and freedom for the oppressed. It was more merciful than the Valdorians deserved, and they all knew it. And if we refuse? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Stone did not smile, and he did not threaten. And he simply stated a fact. Then we will continue fighting until every slave is free and every tyrant has fallen, he said. And we will not stop, and we will not tire. And we will not give up, because that is not what humans do. The treaty was signed within the hour, in the years that followed. The galaxy transformed in ways no one had predicted. The human alliance grew to include over 50 species, all united by the blue emblem of Earth and the promise of freedom. The Valdorian Empire still existed, but it was smaller and weaker and no longer ruled through terror, and on a small blue planet in an unremarkable solar system. Children grew up learning about the Prometheus Initiative and the brave men and women who had saved humanity from extinction. Dr. Elena Vasquez lived long enough to see the memorial to the architects completed. A beautiful structure that floated in orbit around Earth and caught the light of the sun. She cried when she saw it, just as she had cried on the day the war engines first activated. We kept our promise, she whispered to the stars, and we survived, and we remembered. The Valdorian Empire had mocked Earth as a world of primitive creatures with nothing to offer. They had learned the truth the hard way. Humanity was not a species to be conquered. Humanity was the galaxy's awakening, the answer to 12,000 years of tyranny, and the inheritors of everything the architects had dreamed, and they were only just getting started.